It was a crisp Thursday morning when Landon Johnston, one of the youngest tech billionaires in the country, noticed something that stopped him mid-stride. For the first time in 10 years, Linda hadn't shown up for work. Linda Morrison had been more than punctual. She was a force of nature. Every single morning at 6:45 a.m., without fail, she would arrive at his penthouse in her simple white shirt and sensible shoes, carrying that gentle smile that somehow transformed his sterile mansion into something that felt almost like a home. But that morning, her absence echoed through the empty halls like a warning bell. Landon didn't panic at first. People take sick days, he reasoned, pulling out his phone. But when his first call went to voicemail, then his second, then his third, a strange knot of worry began tightening in his chest. Linda wasn't just another employee on his payroll. Over the past decade, she had become the one constant in his chaotic, screen-obsessed world. She was dignified, warm, and endlessly patient. She never asked for favors, never complained about his demanding schedule, never took a day off unless something was seriously wrong. She'd been there through his greatest triumphs and his loneliest nights, a maternal presence he'd never fully acknowledged. Landon had always prided himself on knowing his business inside and out. Every algorithm, every metric, every competitor. But sitting in his minimalist living room that morning, he realized with uncomfortable clarity that he knew almost nothing about Linda. He didn't know if she had children, grandchildren, or where she went when she left his mansion each evening. For someone who had built an empire predicting human behavior through data, he'd been completely blind to the actual human being who'd cared for him for a decade. That realization unsettled him. As the morning bled into afternoon with still no word, Landon made a decision. He grabbed his Tesla keys, dismissed his driver with a wave, and did something he hadn't done in years. He drove himself. He pulled up Linda's address from his HR files, feeling a twinge of shame that this was the first time he'd ever looked at it. The GPS displayed a route to a neighborhood on the city's south side. A neighborhood he'd never visited. A neighborhood he'd only ever glimpsed from highway overpasses. The drive was a revelation. His sleek car glided past gleaming downtown towers, through trendy midtown streets, and then, slowly, unmistakably, into another world entirely. The pristine boulevards gave way to potholed streets. The boutique coffee shops faded into corner stores with bars on the windows. The air itself seemed different here, heavier with stories of survival that his wealth had never let him see. When he finally pulled up to the address, his breath caught. Linda's house sat at the end of a narrow street, a small, weathered structure with peeling paint the color of faded seafoam. One window was covered not with curtains, but with what looked like an old bedsheet. The wooden porch sagged slightly, and the yard was bare except for a few resilient weeds. Landon sat in his car, hands still gripping the steering wheel, and for the first time in years, he felt completely, utterly out of his depth. Then he heard it. Faint but unmistakable through his cracked window. Before we begin, the algorithm brought you here for a reason, but it might never show you this channel again. Don't leave your growth to a random line of code. Secure your spot and subscribe so you never miss the unfair advantage everyone else is looking for. I hope you have done just that. Now, let's get back to the story. Landon Johnston had built his fortune on patterns. Algorithms that predicted behavior, systems that never failed, routines that ran like clockwork. At 32, he'd already sold 2 companies and was building his third. Forbes called him a visionary. TechCrunch called him ruthless. His mother, on the rare occasion she called, simply called him busy. But that Thursday morning, his perfectly calibrated world felt wrong. The coffee machine hummed in the kitchen, but no one had started it. The breakfast nook sat empty. No warm muffins, no cut fruit arranged on the marble counter. The air in his penthouse felt sterile, untouched, like a hotel room between guests. Landon stood in the center of his living room, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city, and felt profoundly alone. Linda should have been here an hour ago. He checked his phone again. Nothing. He called her number for the fourth time, listening to it ring and ring before clicking to voicemail. Linda, it's Landon. Just checking in. Call me back when you get this. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, uncertain, almost pleading. He paced to the window, fingers drumming against his thigh. This wasn't like her. Linda Morrison didn't just disappear. In 10 years, she'd never missed a day without calling first. 10 years of arriving before dawn, of quiet competence, of making his house feel less empty. He'd been 22 when he'd hired her, fresh off his first startup exit, drowning in success he didn't know how to handle. She'd been the steady hand that kept everything together while he built empires. But what did he actually know about her? The question landed like a punch. He knew she took the bus. He knew she hummed old gospel songs while she worked. He knew she'd left him encouraging notes during his hardest deals. "You've got this, Mr. Johnston. I'm praying for you." But her family? Her address? Her life beyond these walls? Nothing. Landon grabbed his phone and called his assistant. "Maya, I need Linda Morrison's home address. Now." There was a pause. "Is everything okay?" "Just send it." The address appeared on his screen moments later, and Landon stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. South Side. A neighborhood he'd never been to, never even thought about. A zip code that might as well have been on another planet. He could send someone. His driver. His assistant. A courier service. But something stopped him, a whisper of shame, maybe, or the memory of Linda's face lighting up when his first app hit #1. "I always knew you'd do great things, Mr. Johnston," she'd said, her weathered hands clasping his. "I'm so proud of you." When was the last time he'd asked how she was doing? Landon grabbed his keys and headed for the elevator, his expensive shoes clicking against marble floors that suddenly felt too polished, too perfect, too hollow. Landon grabbed his keys and headed for the elevator, his expensive shoes clicking against marble floors that suddenly felt too polished, too perfect, too hollow. The Tesla's navigation guided him south, through streets that grew progressively unfamiliar. At first, the transition was subtle. Luxury condos giving way to older apartment buildings, boutique cafes replaced by chain restaurants. But then the shift accelerated. Glass towers disappeared. The smooth asphalt beneath his tires became cracked and patched, potholes forcing him to slow down. Storefronts sat boarded up, windows covered with faded plywood. A laundromat. A check-cashing place with bars on the windows. A corner store with a handwritten, "We accept EBT" sign. Landon's hands tightened on the steering wheel. People sat on porches in the middle of the day. Elderly men in worn jackets, young mothers with tired eyes watching children play in bare yards. They stared at his car as he passed, and he felt the weight of their gazes like an indictment. This is the same city, he thought, stunned. How had I never seen this? He'd driven past these exits on the highway 1,000 times, glancing at them the way you'd glance at distant mountains. Scenery, backdrop, irrelevant to the route. But this wasn't distant. This was 15 minutes from his penthouse. Linda Street appeared narrower than the others, lined with small houses that leaned slightly, as if exhausted. Peeling paint. Chain-link fences. Cars that looked older than he was. The GPS announced his arrival. Number 847. Landon pulled to the curb and stared. Linda's house was tiny, the paint a faded seafoam color that had mostly given up. One window was covered with what looked like a bedsheet tacked from the inside. The porch sagged. The yard was dirt. He sat there, engine idling, his $1,000 suit suddenly feeling obscene. Fear flickered in his chest. Not of the neighborhood, but of what going inside would force him to see. To know. To carry. Before he could change his mind, Landon heard it. A sound that made no sense, a sound that didn't belong in this moment. A baby crying. Landon killed the engine and stepped out, his legs feeling unsteady. The crying was clearer now, coming from inside the house. Raw, insistent, the sound of an infant who needed something desperately. He walked up the 3 wooden steps to the porch, each one creaking under his weight. His hand hesitated before he knocked. Soft, uncertain, nothing like the confident way he'd knocked on boardroom doors. Footsteps. A voice trying to soothe. Then silence. The door opened a crack, and Linda appeared. Landon had never seen her like this. Her gray hair, usually pulled back neatly, hung loose and disheveled around her face. She wore no uniform, just a simple white t-shirt and jeans that looked worn thin. But it was her eyes that stopped him, exhausted beyond measure, ringed with dark circles, carrying a weight he'd never noticed before. In her arms, she held a tiny infant wrapped in a blue-striped onesie. Mr. Johnston. Her voice cracked with disbelief, and something else. Fear. Landon's mind scrambled to make sense of what he was seeing. Linda, are you okay? Whose baby is this? Her lips trembled. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. She clutched the baby tighter, her weathered hand shaking. Please, sir. Her voice dropped to a whisper, broken and desperate. Please don't fire me. The words hit him like a physical blow. Fire her. She thought he'd come here to fire her? Linda, no, The infant began crying louder, a wail that seemed to pierce straight through the morning air. Linda's whole body trembled with the effort of holding it together. The baby, herself, the fragile dignity she was clinging to. Please come in, Mr. Johnston, she said quietly, stepping back from the door. Her voice was barely audible over the crying. I think I need to explain everything. Landon grabbed his keys and headed for the elevator, his expensive shoes clicking against marble floors that suddenly felt too polished, too perfect, too hollow. Landon stepped inside and the door closed behind him with a soft click that felt final. The house was barely warmer than outside. A small space heater in the corner rattled and wheezed, struggling against the cold. The walls were bare except for a few framed photos, the paint cracked in places. A worn couch sat against one wall, its fabric faded and thin. A small table with 2 mismatched chairs. That was it. He stood there in his tailored navy suit, his Italian leather shoes on her threadbare rug, and felt like an alien who'd landed on the wrong planet. Linda bounced the baby gently, whispering soft reassurances as she moved toward the kitchen. His bottle's almost ready, she said, her voice still shaking. He gets fussy when he's hungry. Landon followed, and through the kitchen doorway he glimpsed the open refrigerator, nearly empty. A carton of milk, some eggs, a half-loaf of bread. The cabinets looked just as sparse. This is my grandson, Linda said, adjusting the baby in her arms. He's 2 months old. His name is Marcus. The infant had stopped crying, now making small fussy sounds as Linda prepared his bottle with practiced efficiency. Landon's eyes drifted to the photos on a narrow shelf. One showed a young woman with Linda's eyes, beautiful, bright-smiled, full of promise. She wore a graduation cap, her whole future ahead of her. Next to it, a photo of a man in military dress uniform, his arm around a younger Linda. Pride and strength radiated from the image. Your husband, Landon asked softly. He passed 12 years ago. Linda tested the bottle on her wrist, then offered it to Marcus, who latched on immediately. Landon sank onto the couch, feeling the springs beneath the cushion. Everything here was clean, meticulously so. The floors swept, the surfaces wiped. Linda had maintained her dignity despite having almost nothing. He looked back at the photo of the young woman, Linda's daughter, and asked the question he was afraid to hear answered. Where is she? Where's his mother? Linda's face crumpled. She looked down at the baby in her arms, tears falling onto his blue-striped onesie. Her name was Jasmine, she whispered. She was 29. She died giving birth to Marcus 2 months ago. The words hung in the air like smoke. Landon couldn't breathe. There were complications during delivery. She didn't have insurance, so she waited too long to go to the hospital. By the time they got her in, Linda's voice broke. They said it could have been prevented. If she'd had proper prenatal care. If she'd gone in sooner. Landon felt something twist in his chest. And the father. Linda's laugh was bitter, broken. Her boyfriend. He disappeared the day Jasmine died. Just gone. Left this baby with no one but me. Marcus had finished his bottle, his tiny eyes starting to close. Linda held him against her shoulder, patting his back with a rhythm born of exhaustion. The state said I could take temporary custody, but I'm 68 years old, Mr. Johnston. I live in this house. I make barely enough to feed myself. Her voice dropped lower. They're watching me, making sure I'm stable enough, fit enough. If I can't prove I can care for him properly, they'll take him away. So you've been working and taking care of him alone? My neighbor watches him when she can, but she's 73. I had no choice. I couldn't bring him to work. People like us don't get to bring our problems to your world. Her eyes met his, full of fear and shame. I couldn't lose my job, Mr. Johnston. It's all I have. Without it, they'll definitely take Marcus. So I didn't tell you. You've been dealing with this alone for 2 months? Landon's voice cracked. Linda nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face. I didn't have a choice, Mr. Johnston. I've never had the luxury of choices. Landon sat frozen on the worn couch, his mind reeling. 10 years. He'd known Linda for 10 years, and he'd known nothing. Not about Jasmine, not about her struggles, not about the poverty she returned to every night after making his life comfortable. You know what the worst part is? Linda's voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes fixed on Marcus sleeping against her shoulder. You've been more like a son to me than anyone. I watched you build your company from nothing. I celebrated every victory with you, prayed for you through every setback, and I couldn't even tell you when my own daughter died. The words landed like stones in Landon's stomach. Linda, I've been a terrible son, he said, the admission scraping his throat raw. She shook her head quickly. No, sir. That's not what I meant. But it's true. He looked around the small room again, seeing it differently now. The empty refrigerator, the struggling heater, the careful cleanliness that couldn't hide the poverty. You've been coming to work every day, exhausted, grieving, taking care of an infant alone. Mrs. Patterson next door helps when she can, Linda said softly. She's 73 and her arthritis is bad, but she tries. Some days I have to leave Marcus with her even though I know she can barely manage. Other days I call in sick, not because I'm sick, but because I can't find anyone to watch him. How much does it cost? Formula, diapers, everything. Linda's shoulders sagged. About $1,500 a month. Maybe more. My salary is just enough to cover rent and Marcus's needs. I've been. She paused, shame coloring her cheeks. I've been skipping meals, eating less so he can have what he needs. Landon's mind flashed to his Apple Watch. $1, $200. Bought without a second thought. She was starving herself to feed a baby, and he'd spent more than her 2-month salary on a device to track his workouts. Why didn't you tell me? His voice came out strangled. Why didn't you ask for help? Linda met his eyes, and in them he saw decades of invisible labor, of swallowing pride, of knowing her place. Because the world taught me that my struggles aren't your concern, Mr. Johnston. I'm the help. I'm supposed to make your life easier, not harder. People like me, we learn to be invisible. We learn that our problems don't belong in your world. The truth of it gutted him. She was right. He'd never asked because he'd never wanted to know. It was easier to believe everything was fine, to enjoy the comfort she provided without questioning what it cost her. Landon stood and walked to the window, looking out at the cracked street, the small houses leaning against each other like exhausted soldiers. When he turned back, his voice was different. Not the confident billionaire, but something smaller, more human. And. Linda, I need to tell you something I should have said a decade ago. I've been selfish, Landon said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I've been blind. I've treated you like a service instead of a person. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Linda looked down, fresh tears spilling. Let me help, he said. Please. Let me help you. I don't want your pity, Mr. Johnston. Her voice was firm despite the tears. I don't want your charity. This isn't charity, Landon said, moving closer. This is family. You've taken care of me for 10 years. Longer than anyone else has. You were there when my own parents weren't. You made me breakfast before the biggest meetings of my life. You left me notes when I felt like giving up. His voice cracked. Let me take care of you now. Please. The dam broke. Linda's shoulders shook with sobs she'd been holding back for months. Maybe years. All the grief for Jasmine, all the exhaustion, all the fear of losing Marcus, all the weight of trying to survive with dignity when the world made it nearly impossible. It poured out of her in waves. Landon reached for Marcus, and Linda let him take the baby, too overcome to hold him steady. The infant settled against his chest, surprisingly heavy, shockingly fragile. Landon had never held a baby before. He could feel Marcus's heartbeat, feel the warmth of his small body, the complete vulnerability of this tiny human who depended entirely on the woman falling apart in front of him. You've been doing this alone, Landon said softly, one arm cradling Marcus, the other reaching for Linda's hand. At 68. While working full-time. While grieving your daughter. Linda squeezed his hand, and through her tears, she began to talk. Really talk. About Jasmine's dreams of becoming a nurse. About her late husband's laugh. About the life she'd built and lost and was trying desperately to rebuild. For the first time in 10 years, they weren't employer and employee. They were just two people holding on. The baby fell asleep in Landon's arms, and for the first time in his life, the young billionaire understood what it meant to hold something truly precious. Not stock options or market shares, but a human life depending entirely on love. Landon pulled out his phone, Marcus still sleeping against his chest. Maya, I need you to make some emergency deliveries to an address I'm sending you. Baby supplies, everything. Groceries. A new heater. Actually, send furniture too. A crib, a proper couch, whatever a home with an infant needs. He could hear his assistant's surprise, but she didn't question him. Within an hour, the first delivery trucks began arriving. Linda stood at the window, hand over her mouth, as two men carefully carried in a brand new crib still in its box. Then came groceries. Bags and bags of them. Diapers. Formula. Baby clothes. A space heater that actually worked. A comfortable couch to replace the one with broken springs. Neighbors began emerging from their houses. Cautious at first, then curious. An elderly man with kind eyes. A young mother with a toddler on her hip. Mrs. Patterson from next door, moving slowly but smiling wide. Linda, you didn't tell us you had rich family, Mrs. Patterson said, hugging her. He's not family, Linda started, but Landon interrupted gently. Actually, I am. The neighbors shared stories as they helped bring things inside. How Linda had given Mrs. Patterson money for her prescriptions last month. How she'd bought groceries for the young mother when her food stamps ran out. How she'd helped the elderly man pay his water bill when the city threatened to shut it off. She'd been sharing her small paycheck with everyone around her while barely surviving herself. Landon made more calls. His lawyer would handle the guardianship paperwork pro bono. His accountant would set up an account to pay Linda's rent for the next year. He scheduled appointments with the best pediatrician in the city for Marcus, and a doctor for Linda herself. As the sun set over Linda's neighborhood, Landon sat on her newly delivered couch, surrounded by her grateful neighbors, and felt something he'd never felt in his penthouse: belonging. But he knew this was just the beginning. Landon returned home near midnight, but the penthouse that had once felt like an achievement now felt obscene. The marble counters, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the silence. It all felt hollow, purchased, wrong. He didn't sleep. Instead, he sat at his laptop researching until dawn. Domestic worker rights, elderly caregiver statistics, poverty wages, the invisible economy that kept people like him comfortable. The numbers were staggering. Millions of people like Linda, working multiple jobs, one emergency away from losing everything. At 6 a.m., he called an emergency board meeting. By noon, he'd announced the Linda Morrison Family Support Foundation with $50 million in initial funding. The board sat stunned as he outlined company-wide changes. Full benefits for all workers, including contractors. Retirement plans. Childcare support. Living wages, not minimum wages. And Linda? His CFO asked carefully. Linda retires today with full salary for life, Landon said. Her grandson's education is fully funded through college. She's earned that and more. The announcement made waves. Within weeks, other tech billionaires were launching similar initiatives. Media outlets ran stories about the invisible workers who made Silicon Valley possible. Landon used his platform to amplify their voices, to humanize the people the industry had long ignored. 6 months later, everything had changed. Landon stood in Linda's kitchen, renovated now, with new cabinets and a refrigerator that actually stayed cold. It was Sunday, his new routine. Marcus sat on his lap, babbling happily, reaching for Landon's face with tiny hands. "Tell me about when you were young," Landon said to Linda, who sat across from him with tea. "I want to know everything." Linda smiled, the exhaustion finally gone from her eyes. "We have time now," she said softly. "We have all the time in the world." Later, as Landon drove home, he thought about the photos now sitting on his office desk, Linda and Marcus, smiling. About the new mission statement on his wall: "Success means nothing if it doesn't serve humanity." About Marcus, who would grow up knowing both worlds, bridging the divide Landon had once been so blind to. Linda sat in her comfortable chair, Marcus asleep in her arms, surrounded by photos of Jasmine. For the first time since losing her daughter, she could truly grieve, and rest, and hope. Landon had learned that day that true wealth isn't measured in billions, but in the hearts you touch and the burdens you choose to share. And Linda had taught him that dignity isn't about what you have, but who you are in the face of what you've lost. In the end, they had both found what they'd been missing: family. The baby fell asleep in Landon's arms, and for the first time in his life, the young billionaire understood what it meant to hold something truly precious. Not stock options or market shares, but a human life depending entirely on love.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely enjoy the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out.